Well, thank you very much, Gina. I'm not sure if that was me or somebody else that you were talking about. Look, of course, I'd like to begin by acknowledging the traditional custodians of the land and pay my respects to elders past and present, and I want to acknowledge any Indigenous people here today. I'm going to say at the outset, I'm going to apologise because I probably end up rushing through this, but unfortunately, some of you have been following some tragic events last week. It means I need to get back to our electorate sooner rather than later. But it is a commitment that I made, and I'm here, and I want to, of course, acknowledge, and I have had to write them down, acknowledge the people that have made the big effort to come here. Jody, I know that they say that Sydney is very similar to parts of Canada. Look, Sydney is a much better place. Australia is the best country in the world. You can tell Justin I said that. I think Justin Trudeau, who doesn't want to be Justin Trudeau? I don't know. Everybody does. I think, but it's fantastic, the things that happen in Canada. And I think that we could learn a lot from that as well. Of course, Alistair McEwen, the Australian Disability Commissioner, lovely to see you here today. Family Advocacy, who I've met with before, and basically we started talking about this sort of thing a while ago. And of course, there's a number of people that I recognise from Minister's Office, the Department of Education, teachers, parents. I see a couple of young people as well around. I think that might be, and people who look much younger. Look, please do me a favour. I haven't had too many laughs this week, so if I try and crack a joke, just laugh anyway. My kids tell me that you should never tell people to laugh at your own jokes, but I do. Look, today's presentation is going to be a little bit of a talk about a journey, but also some of the beliefs that I have in terms of education. Gina's introduction was far too flattering. I was just a person who was in a really lucky position to be able to do something that made a difference to people's lives. And that's something that I think, if we can go through our lives making a difference, then we are on the right track. And it doesn't matter what position you're in, you should always be able to make someone's life that little bit better. And I think that's something that I'll always carry with me. It's something that inspires me to do the things that I do. And I'm not your quintessential politician. Sometimes I get upset when people refer to me still as a politician, because I go, look, I'm a teacher at heart. But of course, the decision to leave school and to run for Parliament was a difficult one, because I absolutely loved the job that I had. And it wasn't a job. For me, it was a lifestyle. It was part of a family. I'd often talk about our school family, our school community as a family. And when you see our community, see the things that we've done, you understand why that. But having said that, I'd always told my students that if you have an opportunity to do something that's going to help other people on a bigger scale, then you should do it. And when the opportunity presented to run for Parliament, I thought maybe we can start looking at the ways that things that my experiences in life could make a difference in some way. And so hopefully one day I get to have a bit more influence in terms of the way that education is run in the state. But certainly in the meantime, having a platform to be able to talk about some of these things is very much a starting point. I love that photo. That's a really awesome photo. So my neck of the woods, southwest of Sydney, sometimes cops a really bad rap. It's an incredible community. They do it tough, but there's a sense of community that you don't find anywhere else. We've got 150 different cultural groups. We've got people from all over the world. This is where people come to live, from all over the world. We are a beautiful community. And the thing that I love about our community is our warts and all. It doesn't really matter. We just absolutely love each other. We have our, like all things in a family, you got your people who want to be the organisers, you got your people who want to be the nutters, you got all sorts, but it works. But it's a beautiful community, vibrant, colourful, incredibly aspirational. And we've got, that's a reflection of, I think, our modern multicultural Australia, and I often talk about that. I'm going to try and use this, and people always apologise if they make a mistake. So I started off at a school where basically I walked in and the prevailing attitude was, you can't do anything here. Why are you wasting your time? The kids aren't worth it. And some of you would have seen a speech where I talked about kids being worth it. And I often use that phrase, that every single thing is worth it. Once you give up on somebody or something, then I think you need to move on and let somebody else have a go who actually comes at it with fresh eyes, who truly believes. So to give you a quick snapshot, I turned up to a school, barbed wire, bars on windows. There wasn't a little bit of greenery anywhere, peeling paint. There was everything that you could imagine that was unwelcoming about a place. And of course, when you've got somewhere like that, the behaviours that are exhibited are not pleasant, and the attitude is even worse, because when people look around and they see everything around them falling apart, That's the value that they place on themselves, that they go that we are this. And I had to have some really difficult conversations with teachers. And they weren't difficult for me. It was more difficult for them because I needed to shake it up. There was this attitude that they were turning up to school, and because they were turning up, then they were somehow doing some martyr thing. But I reminded them that they were getting paid and they were getting plenty of support. And the expectation was that this was someone's child, and nobody wants their child to have anything less than the very best. So we had to change that mindset, which was so incredibly important. We did all sorts of things. I'm not going to go into that because we're short of time. But even if it came down to painting, I mean, to give you one example of the school community that we built. And it's funny, somebody brought this up yesterday. I met up with some former teachers because, you know, one person's child had a baby, and so because we're part of a school family, we actually went and visited. So there was about 10 of us all went and visited this person in a 2-bedroom unit. And I realised we should have brought some camping chairs or something. But one of the teachers there was telling me, and I hadn't even told you, she goes, Jihad, you would stand up in a staff meeting and you would say, okay, after school I need some people to do some volunteering for Homework Centre, and people would put their hand up. On the weekend we're going to be doing a Bunnings barbecue, people would put their hand up. That there was just this desire to get involved in things. And she reminded me, and I've forgotten about that in the school holidays, because we couldn't afford to do it, we actually managed to just paint the whole library all by ourselves. We had about 20 teachers came in and gave up 1 week to paint the school library. We could do the carpet, but we managed to pull some strings with some of the local businesses, and someone donated the carpet, and we managed to paint the whole library for about $1,000, where it would have cost us somewhere about $30,000 or $40,000, money that we just didn't have. But when the boys walked back into school at the start of that next school year, what a difference it made. All of a sudden, the carpets were new. The painting looked really nice. You know, we'd bought some El Cheapo furniture from IKEA, but it did the trick and it didn't really matter. And the other thing that I needed staff to see was this idea that every single person belongs. And I'm not sure if you can read that, and I'm not insulting your intelligence, but I'm thinking that maybe some of you might, like me, might have some eyesight difficulties. It says this, and we had this on every single school door, every single classroom door. Welcome. Through this door walk our future creative thinkers, problem solvers, and innovators. And I had that on every single door. But I actually had these students and some others who put it up on the classroom doors. And the reason I did that is because when you get kids to put things up, they don't take them down. Because prior to that, you'd put up posters and then you'd see half a poster, you see it thrown out, you see a paper aeroplane. Boys had not been used to that. They kind of almost, at first they were embarrassed, but I'd say, no, let's show them what they can do. And let's show every kid what they can do. Let's celebrate it. We take photos, put the photos of the kids up all over the school, doing things so that they could actually see what they were doing was really good. The funniest thing, of course, is that the kids would take the photos of themselves because they wanted the photo. So I'd have to get up on assembly and say, look, guys, if you like your photo, come and tell us and we'll get you a copy. Don't take it off don't take it off. And of course, you do lots of funny things like, you put it on a pin board, and of course, boys being boys, and I'm sure girls would do the same, but sometimes they pull out the pin and they stick it in somebody's, in an awkward spot where it would hurt, because it's quite funny, because boys do funny things like that. So we had to outsmart them, and we got Velcro. And it's always about the trick and trying to outsmart them, but this idea of everybody belonging was really, really important, and making sure that that mindset changed not only with the teachers, but also with the kids, because I had kids who would come up to me and say, sir, I'm done. Sir, I'm going to be hopeless. I'm not going to go to uni. I'm not going to go to TAFE. I'm going to drop out. That was actually the attitude. And just very quickly, one of the stories, I'll never forget this. Actually, there's two things. My first day, I had to deal with a fight, which was a shock to me. Like the very first day of school, I was dealing with a fight between two students. The fights with the teachers came later, but the two students to begin with. But the second day, this kid who saw me in the playground, and he basically, and I won't use the language that he used, but basically he said, this school is a such and such a school, and why was I here? And why did I get up on assembly and say that it was going to be a great school? Like I'm crazy. I mean, he didn't hold back, which was really nice. But I remember telling him that I didn't believe that it was such a school, and that he could be something if he really wanted to, and he had to work hard. That told me the attitude that the kids had of themselves, of education. He said, sir, we're done. I wasn't born in Australia. We don't belong here. Fast forward a few years, that kid ended up becoming a school teacher. And then what is even better, and this gives me the tingles. He actually became a teacher at our school. And that's a true story. And that's the power of education. That's the power of creating an inclusive education system. He worked as a casual. He had an opportunity to get a full-time job somewhere else, but he came back as a casual. And when I said to him, mate, you've got a full-time chance. And he said, sir, you looked at, and the kids still call me sir. I still call the teachers sir. That's just our respect. He said, you made me believe I need to make other kids believe that they can be better than what people think they are. And that's the stuff that brings tears to your eyes, but that's the stuff that actually motivates you. That's the stuff that inspires you, and that's what belonging is. And one of the things that I would say to teachers is you set the weather every single day. So I had this habit of standing out the front of the school, shaking kids' hands, greeting their parents. That was just my thing, and I made the deputies do it. And at first I thought it was a chore, but it actually wasn't that. It was the start of the relationship that we built. And then at the end of the day, we'll do the same thing. And then as time went on, we would up the ante a little bit. Then it became about making sure the uniform, so that we had everybody feeling like they were the same. Because, of course, even in an area where maybe there's there's a bit of disparity with the wealth, there are some kids who are much more obviously better off than other kids. And I never wanted a kid who was struggling financially to feel that he was any less than somebody else, even whether it was down to the shoes. And that's why I was sort of pretty keen on uniform. I'm not normally a big uniformity person, but there's a strength in that as well. But when I talk about setting the weather, I would say to the teachers, I want you to stand out. And this took years. It didn't just happen straight away. I mean, the first battles were trying to get people to turn up to school. Going down to the station, picking the kids up from the station, because if it was nice weather, there was a good chance they'd just go down to the beach. They wouldn't actually come to school because there was nothing in school that made them want to be there. But I'd say to the teachers, I want you to stand out the front of the class, and I want you to welcome the kids, because you set the weather. Because if you're in a grumpy mood, don't come and complain to me when the kids muck up. If you're in a happy mood, at least there's something that's a little bit different. If you welcome the kids, then it makes a change. Now that slide, I was only meant to talk for 1 minute on that. And I suppose it comes down to, this is a generic picture. That's not from our school. It's just a generic picture. And it's that really important point that everybody's good at something, and I will talk about that in the sense of an inclusive education all of the time. Every single person in the world has some talent. Some are lucky because they've got a little bit more talent than others, but everybody does have a talent. And we just need to, as educators, find that talent, because the best thing you can do in education is give a student confidence to be able to see themselves as a success. So it doesn't mean that you're successful because you get 80, 90% in an examination. It means you're successful because you're a contributor. It means you're successful because you actually make a positive change to the school. It means that you're a success because you represent the school in a good way. It means you're a success because you saw somebody getting teased and you stood up for that kid. That's what success is. Everybody has got it. But when you give someone a pat on the back, what a difference it makes. And so I coined this phrase, and I would use it all the time. We're really good in schools at finding kids doing the wrong thing. We're really good at it. Really good at it. Probably too good. So I put the challenge out to teachers, and the phrase I used was, we're going to catch students doing the right thing. Because that's got to be a change. Because I don't mind if a kid does the wrong thing, you pick them up, you put, they go through the discipline process and all that. That's not a problem. That's the thing you've got to do. You've got to have your rules. But on the same token, I also want to make sure that we acknowledge a student for the success that he has. And I mean, I say he because obviously it was a boys' school, but it would refer to any. Give them a pat on the back when they've done the wrong thing. Now, the cynics would say, oh, you're giving them a pat on the back for bringing a pencil. It wasn't like that. But for some kids to actually get to school was the first and important step. Because we had attendance records where kids wouldn't turn up to school. We had kids who might have to have the day off because they were helping their mum or their dad. They were looking after their little brother or sister. They came to school because they just needed to be there. And so if we started finding them doing the right thing, that made a big difference. And the really great thing from an education perspective and from a principal's perspective was if I had a student pulled up into my office, he knew that it wasn't me, because kids always go, oh, you're picking on me, sir. They pick on me. They don't like me. I go, mate, they're not picking on you. They picked on you doing, they picked up on you doing the wrong thing. But tell me, have they ever told you you've done something good? And that was really, that's really powerful, because then what a kid sees is that there's an element of fairness in this. And kids really love fairness. But when you've also got that, you have the high expectation. And I treat kids the same. And I think that's really important. Once we start putting kids into boxes and we start to differentiate too much, then what we're actually doing is we're saying we have a different expectation of you than we do of this person. And when we do that, people can start taking advantage of that. But it creates a resentment within the students. Students are heaps smarter than we give them credit for. They are much more insightful than we give them credit for. And sometimes what we do is we actually pretend that they don't know. They know a lot more than all of us put together. They can pick the teacher within an instant. And the worst thing was when a kid would come up to me and say something about a teacher, in my heart I'd know they were 100% right. I'll go, oh, no, they're not. No, they're not. I'm thinking, this kid is so insightful. But having, they go, oh, so this teacher's, no, they're not. No. But I'm thinking, this kid's really bright. They know exactly but they're insightful because they see what's going on. And I think that's the important thing. They don't care if a kid's got, whether it's a physical disability, an emotional disability, an intellectual disability, whether a kid's got different colour hair. We had kids who had all sorts of things that would make them potentially be different. But if we started to identify them as different, then they were different. All we did was we said they were part of our school family and that we needed to treat them and expect the same of them as we would for anybody else. And I'll talk a little bit later on about that. I'm going to give you a quick example of a boy. I like to give examples of students. So I think the best thing you could do is give real life examples. We had this young kid called Omar. It's not the Omar that I spoke about once before, as I've spoken about. And then I thought, man, how many Omars did we have at the school? There must have been a lot of Omars. Either that or just the name is etched in my head, I mean, of course, it was like when I didn't know a kid's name, and you'd be in a play, hey, mate, Ahmed. You get about 5 kids would turn around. No, not you, no, the other one. Because you just take a risk, you take the chance. Omar was one of those real tough kids. He was the guy who would always get himself into trouble. He'd walk around the playground like he was the ant's pants. Omar was actually, I really liked Omar. I really, really liked him because I liked that he had a bit of personality, he had a bit of oomph to him, and he was actually a really lovely kid. What I discovered about Omar was that he would actually look after his unwell mother, and he'd look after his brothers and his sisters, and he would leave school to start working at the local fruit shop. So all this big tough bravado, he was actually like the softest kid that you could ever imagine. But Omar used to get himself into trouble a lot, and I sort of suspected that he had real reading difficulties. But because of his attitude, he'd try and get out of it. And this is how I found it one day. So we're down at Punch Bowl Station, because I always used to hang out at the station after school to make sure the kids just moved along. Go home, boys. You can go home now. And I was having a chat with him outside the chicken shop. There's George's Chicken Shop. Not to say that the best chips, actually. You can still get vinegar on your chips at George's Chicken Shop. And they still serve them in those bags, with the aluminium inside. They all beautiful. And we're having a chat waiting for the bus. And I just said to him, Omar, I said, you're just this, you're a top kid, but not everyone knows that. And he had, the Mohican style haircut, they're sort of trendy now, but back then it looked like it was a lout haircut, with the shaved back, a bit of the ponytail. I said, mate, people would look at you and think that you're something different, but I know you're just this great kid. And he sort of confided in me a few things. And I said, I think you get yourself in trouble because you're trying to hide for the fact that you don't know how to read properly. I know how to read, sir. I know how to read. What are you saying? I'm dumb? No. I'm not saying, no, not at all. I'd never say you're dumb. You'd probably bash me, but what I'm, and these are the conversations that I would have with kids. So not in a formal setting, just in the playground, in the street, wherever it could be. I said, yeah. He goes, sir, see? No, I can read. Have a look over there. And he pointed across the road. He said, see, it says chemist. It didn't say chemist. It actually said pharmacy. And I said to him, mate, tomorrow we're going to have to do some work on it. I go, you're right, it's a chemist. But it actually said pharmacy. And that was how we managed to get through for a long time. And a lot of people hadn't picked up on that. So then once we started doing it, then we had to work out how do we help this kid without embarrassing him. This is like the big tough kid in the school. Can you imagine a teacher walking up saying, hey, Omar, I want you to come to the separate class, Can you imagine that? So we had to kind of do a real surreptitious way of being able to help him out. And that's where some of the teachers helped out after school. We had some discrete support within the classroom. We modified some of the work without him being embarrassed, because there is a huge embarrassment thing. But that was his whole idea, was to be able to deflect by getting into trouble. Anyway, I mean, he went on, he ended up leaving. Those were the days when you could leave at the end of year 10. He ended up leaving and he went on to become an apprentice. And I saw him. I still see the boys around all the time. And I saw him, and he's finished his apprenticeship as a carpenter. And he said, and you know, we were talking about that, and he said, sir, I really struggled at TAFE. And what I discovered was that some of the teachers were still helping him out, some of our teachers after school helping him out with his reading and stuff. Had we given up on that kid, had we just thought, this is a naughty kid, goodness knows where he would have been. Whereas he's on the right trajectory, and that's, I think, a really important thing, that we need to be really careful that we don't label kids or that we don't judge kids because of the way they present themselves. So this is one of my favourite photographs of all time. This is my absolute, I think, I've got lots of favourite photographs, you know, but this one is one of my favourites because, remember I said that we went in with the attitude, so you can see the blue paint? That wasn't like that. That was us sort of, you know, making sure. That was the old BER. You know, most people got, you know, people say the BER was like a, you know, some schools got ripped off. I think we actually took advantage of the tradies. We managed to get a good local person to paint the entire school. Ex-student was actually there as well, and I joked with him. I said, mate, make sure you don't take a computer on the way out. And I said, what's the irony that you're painting your old school in your school holidays? But the boy was painting it with such a meticulous attention that he was really proud that he was painting at school. Those graduation gowns, parents made those. Because many of our boys, they were the very first in their family to finish high school. And I made a big issue of them graduating high school. So the parents actually made those graduation gowns. We managed to do everything. It's amazing what you can do when you scrimp and save and find money and volunteer. But that's how we created our school community. Because we actually had parents doing it, and the boys loved it. But in that group, there are boys who were the first in their family. There are the boys with learning difficulties. There are boys with intellectual difficulties. There are boys who, you know, incredibly gifted in different ways. But you wouldn't know. And that's the really important point, that you just would not know who's who. What you know is that this is a bunch of kids who graduated their year 12, who have finished off their education for the first time ever. And so when this attitude comes through, and it came through every single thing that we talked about, the kids start believing in it. We didn't have kids anymore saying, oh, you know, I don't want to go, I'm going to leave school, I'm going to become a troublemaker or whatever it might be. We actually started having kids aspiring to finish school. And that is incredibly powerful, because that's how you change a community. That's the power of education. That's the power of believing in an inclusive education. That's the power of believing that every single person has got something good in them, that every single person deserves an opportunity. When that attitude permeates from the leadership through to the teachers, to the kids, the school community sees it. You raise the expectations, you know what you want, and the kids will get to that point. And you're realistic, and that's, I think, the important thing. So we modify, but we don't dumb down, and I think that's a really important thing. Sometimes people mistake modification of what they're teaching for dumbing down. If we're dumbing down, then we're selling the kids short, and we can't do that. But do we need to modify it? Absolutely. Sometimes we need to modify it for a kid who's got visual impairment. But what do you do? I mean, I remember we had a boy who had visual impairment, and the teacher thought they were really helping, which was very nice. When he went to do an exam, they got it on a big A3 piece of paper. Everyone else had an A4 piece of paper. I just go, look, I think it's really nice what you've done, but maybe just do on an A4 paper. But just, you know, like, it doesn't matter if his is 40 pages long, his exam, but make him feel like he's the same as everybody else. I don't want other kids looking at him saying, oh, he's different. Because when we keep saying people are different, we actually inadvertently create those barriers that we don't want. And I think that's a really important thing. And so one of the things that I didn't do was I didn't have a exclusive support unit. I think that was, I mean, it would have been, I think sometimes my staff would have hoped that I would have done that, but I wouldn't do that, because again, it fits in everything that I've been saying. Once we start saying to people, you're different, you're separate, then it actually creates divisions, and it goes against everything that I believe in, everything I believe in terms of an inclusive education. But what we did do is we provided discrete support. And part of the discrete support would be having, say, an assistant teacher, a teacher's aide. They became known as SLSOs, having some work that was done that was slightly modified but it was sort of incorporated. The kids knew who was getting support, but they didn't, they didn't tease the others. Now, I'm just going to be rushing it, and I want to, just this last one here with, you talk about that. I'll give a perfect example. We had a kid with Down syndrome. He's not in that photo, but he graduated year 12. His dad, I remember telling me in year 9, don't worry, Mr. Dibby, I just need you to babysit him. And I said, I'm not here to babysit. And I think he thought I wanted this kid out. I said, I'm here to teach. I'm here to give him an opportunity. He had his own course. He enrolled in the life skills course. But when it came to the other subjects, he was with everybody else. And that was really important. In the playground, he was with everybody else. He was expected to go to the athletics carnival, the swimming carnival, to help us out, all sorts of things. And I think that was a really important one. But the thing that we do as educators more than anything else is that we actually teach students without realising that we're teaching them. And what we're teaching them is not necessarily always through a chalkboard or, interactive whiteboard. It's actually through the way that we are, the way that we make them feel. And in the playground, that kids are much smarter than we give them credit for. Let's give them some credit. I never saw kids teasing other kids because of a disability or because they were different. I mean, kids would give it to each other. Some of the best insults I ever saw and heard were in the playground. And I try and remember those so that maybe I can drop them in Parliament every now and then, because that's where you need. I think my life as a teacher in a boys' high school really prepared me for being able to give it back, in a respectful way, of course. Once the kids cut out the swearing, it was quite good. The problem is once I censored it so much, it wasn't funny anymore. But let's also make sure that we recognise the difference between a bit of banter and a bit of bullying, because I think it's also really important that we ensure that there is a difference between being bullied and a bit of banter. We found that the boys, and I know the girls do at my daughter's school, they know the lines between what's right and what's wrong. I said kids were being teased, and I don't mind kids, like having a bit of a laugh, but they would never cross that line to a kid being picked on because they were different. And that's only because of such a strong inclusive school culture. You couldn't have that if it wasn't to be that case, kids also look out for each other. They really do. But again, it comes down to that whole idea of the culture. And I just want to wrap it up with a few statements. Wrap it up. I want to wrap it up with a blank screen. I think it's really clear that I'm a big believer in inclusive education. I went to school, I couldn't speak English. It could have been very easy for me to be stuck in an ESL class for the rest of my life. It could have been very easy for me to be labelled. And I wasn't. I was given the opportunity. My father loves the story that I ended up becoming an English teacher. Not a very good one, but I became an English teacher. And he loves to tell people that, whenever they call him, excuse my language, whenever they call him Wog or whatever, he goes, my son, he teaching English. That's what education can be. And that's what's beautiful about our education system, but also especially our public education system. We've got all those parameters and all the frameworks, but what you can't do is you can't force a mindset, but you can change your mindset. And once our mindset is actually about the first principles of education, which is that every single person deserves the very best and the opportunity and the support, then we are on the right track. You don't stand up here and say, this is what we're going to do. You can't, as a leader, stand up in a staff meeting or an assembly and say, this is what we're going to do. You've actually got to live it. You've got to prove it, and you've got to make it happen. There's nothing worse than the person who sits in an ivory tower and delivers edicts. That's not what education's about. Education's actually about getting down with everybody else, because we ran a very flat model. Everybody knew that I was the principal, but there was not this, if you've got to see the principal, you've got to go through these different ways. It doesn't work like that. The most important thing that we can do is find any way that we can support students, provide everything that we can for them, and their families. Let's not forget their families as well, because the families are the ones who carry this load outside of school hours, but it is ultimately the way that we change culture. And when we actually change culture in the way that we see education, we change the culture of us as a society. Because if kids are seeing that in schools everybody is valued and everybody has got a strength and everybody can be together, then that permeates through society. What we don't want is where we shelter some kids because they're different, because what we don't realise we're doing is we're actually stunting their growth. And when we stunt their growth, then I think we're failing them as members of our society. So that's the really important, if there was ever a take-note message, that would be it. thank you for the work that you do. I know that every single one of you is passionate. If you can't get passionate about education, then I think there's something wrong with you as a human being. But maybe that's because I'm biased. Thanks a lot, everybody.
Thank you, Jihad. And I guess my response to that is wow. And I know you have to head off, and all the best with everything for this afternoon. Thank you. So I'd like to introduce Jody Carr, we've mentioned earlier, he's member of the Legislative Assembly of New Brunswick in Canada and former Education Minister. Jody has built a reputation for being accessible, active and relentless, equally good traits for a politician or an advocate, I'd say. I've had the privilege of listening to Jody speak once already this week, and just a reminder for if you're live tweeting, you might want to add you might find you want to add a new hashtag after Jody speaks, which is possibly hashtag #JustinWho. So I'd like to welcome Jody Carr to the stage.
Thank you very much. What a great Aussie welcome that I've had since Saturday morning. And I won't show you my socks. That's what Justin Trudeau does. So they're not quite as fancy as his. I'm really, really happy to be here. And of course, we acknowledge that we are gathering on the owners of the land of the traditional elders, past and present, and we always remember that. It was very encouraging so far to hear our speakers. What a motivation, what an inspiration. Our members of Parliament, the Minister Stokes, as well as the Member of Parliament, Jihad, just excellent opportunities going forward. And I know we'll have more to hear from as well. This is Caleb. He is 14. This past school year, he was in grade 8, and his whole class was eagerly anticipating their year-end trip to Quebec City. It's an 8-hour bus ride, and they spend 4 days enjoying the sights and building memories and enjoying friendships at this year-end class trip. You can imagine the excitement. Kids wait all year. They sometimes raise money. There's committees formed for this year-end trip. Caleb also has autism. He has a younger brother. And Caleb has also been included, though, in regular class each and every year for his entire school experience. But a few months leading up to the year-end trip, things started turning the other way. Caleb's mom got word from the school that Caleb would not be able to go on the school trip. She was astonished. When pushed and asked the school what the problem was, they first said that Caleb couldn't go because he wasn't in the mandatory French second language class. Quebec City is known for its Française, something like that. When his mom pushed it, the school did change their mind. But no, it wasn't to allow Caleb on the trip. It was the school decided it wasn't the French language class really, but that Caleb couldn't go because they didn't think he could handle an 8-hour trip without having a violent episode. They were worried he'd have an outburst and hurt someone. You know, like images of cages in your mind, the ravaged kids that burst out in anger and violence. As you can expect, Caleb's parents couldn't believe it, so they fought it. She used her local inclusion family advocacy chapter. Time was running out. The trip was fast approaching. Now we were within weeks. She hadn't told Caleb that he wasn't allowed to go on the trip. She's still hoping that the school will change their mind. After 3 meetings with the regional director, still no luck. The regional director supported the principal of the school. The district was not budging. So she filed a complaint to the Human Rights Commission. Caleb's mother offered to go on the bus with them. But the best the school would go for would be for his mom to drive Caleb in her car and follow behind in a separate vehicle and allow him to go only on 3 of the 9 activities. That's when Caleb's mom called me. as former Minister of Education. She told me about this and I said, what do you think about that response? Not wanting to steer her in the right or wrong direction. She said, I don't feel good about it one bit. I said, damn right you don't. And I'm there with you, and we're going to fight this. So their child has a type of autism that leads him to retreating inward when he is overwhelmed or overstimulated. The funny thing is, he had never been violent towards classmates or anyone else, ever. But the school said there was a problem he had on the bus in his file. But come to find out, it was in grade 2. Never violent. He had trouble getting on the bus to climb up the stairs. That was the problem. They failed to ask the questions. And I said to the regional director, do you have any documents? Do you have any incident reports? What type of problems were these? So I contacted the Secretary of Education. At home we call it the Deputy Minister, and told him that there was a duty under Policy 322, our inclusion policy, that not only schools must be inclusive, but school trips too. Schools must provide reasonable accommodation for their individual needs, that any removal from the common learning environment must be properly justified based on demonstrated undue hardship. And guess what? We got Caleb on the bus. Caleb got to go on the school trip, and Caleb had the trip of a lifetime. He also got to attend all of the 9 activities. And you know what? There wasn't one incident. We couldn't be prouder. I know that for the whole weekend I held my breath, hoping and making sure that nothing would go astray, and it didn't. Even better about the story was that Caleb's mom was telling me the chairperson, the mother who was chairing the fundraising committee at the school for the trip, told Caleb's mom just before we got the word that if he isn't allowed to go on the trip, the morning the bus leaves out of the school parking lot, us parents will tell the bus driver to stop and go no further until Caleb is allowed on the bus. And that was the magic of inclusive education to me. The rest of the parents were standing in solidarity for Caleb and Caleb's mom. And that's what we want for every single school. And how far we've come to now have the other parents advocating. And I almost kind of wanted that to happen, to see the protest. But it didn't have to. But just to know that, it just warmed her heart and warmed my heart as well. I tell you this story to illustrate how powerful good legislation and policy can be. Without the policy, I'm sure Caleb wouldn't be on that school trip. But also, this story tells us, even in our province, with full inclusion, even in our province with the process of moving to a one holistic, full inclusive system, there are challenges. No matter where we live in the world, we are on this same journey. We are all in this together, and we can help each other. Yes, I can provide insight, but you can also help us too. I'm still learning about inclusion. We should always be open to learning. My grandfather told me that when you stop learning, you might as well be dead. And when we are ignorant to problems, we avoid solutions. But once we see and know the problems, as politicians, as teachers, as civil servants, as families, we have a moral obligation to do better. So, here's some things I know about inclusive education. Segregation and congregation based on disability label equals abuse, more times than not. Always has been and always will be. The right to education is the right to an inclusive education, and it's possible. When inclusion doesn't work, it isn't inclusion. Remember that. When someone says, no, but inclusion doesn't work in our school, no, then what you're doing is not inclusion. Because when inclusion properly supported and understood and resourced, inclusion works, and it is the best approach. When we learn together in classrooms, we learn to live together in society. Dynamic, inclusive education shouldn't be simply giving a choice for parents or for only a few who can make it through the barriers. Government often says we need to give parents choice to have segregated options. But we know segregation harms people with disabilities. History tells us, current present day tells us. We know segregation and congregation means fewer resources, poorer curriculum, poorer standards, fewer opportunities. When it comes to other harms affecting children, this is always fascinating to me, government doesn't mind stepping in to prevent these harms. Government don't mind giving parents, governments don't give parents the right to choose to allow their children to do such things as buy cigarettes underage, as an example. We don't allow the choice of children to buy and drink alcohol underage. That's harmful to kids. And even if parents wanted the choice to decide, we don't allow children to drive cars underage. Why? Because these things harm children. Government puts policies, rules, and legislation in place to protect children and families. If segregation and isolation is proven to be harmful to children with disabilities, why would government not step in and protect them also? Government has a moral obligation to step in and prevent harmful segregation and congregation based on disability. Do what the rest of the world is doing. And I'm here to tell you to do what they have committed to doing internationally under the CRPD. Countries like Australia have an international obligation to live up to their commitments to inclusive education. They have signed on to the International Disability Human Rights Convention. Anything less than fully inclusive education opportunities for all children, regardless of differences, is in breach of international law and international human rights. Inclusive education, as I said, when properly understood and supported, is the right thing to do, period. It is better educationally, it is better economically, it is better socially, not just for kids with disabilities, but we've learned today and heard, and you've heard it before, it's better for all children, better for our entire society. So I found it amusing to see Roger go through the different reports. I'm going to tell you a little bit about the New Brunswick story and a few steps on successful change that we experienced in New Brunswick. Oh, they told me not to press the button that I just pressed. Thank you very much, Mike. Oh, and not to press that button either. Here we go. And he said, don't press the wrong button because you always take a minute to say, oh, I pressed the wrong button. I said, I know, don't you just not like that? Anyways, a slide about where New Brunswick is. I didn't want to forget that. You see we're over on the east coast, a little east of Toronto. Where are we? Okay, so Roger mentioned the reports in this country, and very similar to New Brunswick. We had report after report. All of the reports in 1991, 97, 2004 all stated that inclusion was the right way to go, but that it needed support and resources. Sometimes we'd get a few little resources, and then priorities would change. We had inquiries, promises to do better, debate and legislation, and it moved the bar forward. We had also assertive leadership from a premier and from a minister to do better. But basically none of what we have had in New Brunswick would have ever happened were it left to the civil service or political systems. Parents always drive the change by standing up for their children's rights and demanding better. Keys to this were being organized and vigilant. But it takes courage from political leaders to make change happen. You do have that potential political leader in your state and in your country. What we need to know is which brave soul will stand up and not only say the words, but will actually make the difference that we require. There's one out there, at least one. Which one will it be? I think we have that potential in this country, and you will, I feel very strongly, will make sure that we do follow through on that potential. In 2010, when I became minister, we had a wide variance of practice, much similar that I'm hearing about here today. We had a long history of legislation since 1986. All our special schools had closed, but we still had pockets of outdated, segregated practices. Special classes in our schools, you call them, I think, support units in schools, and we also had alternative programs, alternative placements outside of school, and we had the special, famous lifelong life skills training program. You wonder what your lifelong training for, because when you graduate from high school, often you go into a community agency where you're continuing your training, you're continuing to do learning and life skills, and we think that, not we, I know we're converted here in this room, but we think that that's adequate education. It isn't. But we had one school district that had all autistic children congregated in 3 sites. One site in the basement of an elementary school, entrance to that class was from the back entrance, the maintenance door. This was appalling, how we were demonstrating to the other children the value we placed on these children. In fact, when you went to that classroom, there were actually almost more adults in the classroom than there were the children. And we talk about learning not being able to happen in the classroom because of autistic children. Can you imagine what type of learning is actually happening in a classroom of 15 children with autism and almost as many adults? Not very much learning at all. We had no clear inclusion policy in place, lack of clarity, behavioral problems, exclusion from class, field trips, long wait times for assessments. When we started in 2010, we had a lot of these problems. I remember in the corner of a class, a desk turned. I was told by a parent the desk turned to the back of the room with a curtain around the desk in the classroom. And that was supposed to be inclusion. Well, he's in the classroom. Well, no, that's really segregation in the classroom. So our goal was to understand where we were in 2010, what people in the system thought, and how we could move forward to narrow the gap of practice and make everyone better. We wanted one fully inclusive system. And what does that mean? Merging the special education system with the mainstream into one holistic, inclusive system. Very quickly, I'll look at a bit of an example. I probably won't spend as much time on this, but if we can imagine that we have two boats in a river, or maybe on the lake, but anyways, we have the mainstream regular school, and we have the special education school. Of course, research will tell us that the special education school is underfunded, fewer resources, and we have the children. And the goal is to try to take, often we'll see the goal is to try to take the special education school and kind of join on to the mainstream school, and we will place the kids in the mainstream school, but often it'll be in separate classrooms or in the basement. You're all too familiar with this. And can you imagine, though, like if it were a ship and we put the kids in the bottom of the ship, we never let them come to the top. Oh, here's another load of kids. They're allowed, through choice, to go to the mainstream school. And again, they're at the bottom. You know, maybe they'll be able to share lunchtime. Maybe once in a while they might be able to go up on deck and share the cafeteria, maybe at a different time during the day. Or maybe if they do get to go at the same time of the day, they will be at a separate table in the lunchroom. Or maybe, you know, if there's a rescue, an evacuation drill for the ship, and we have a rescue practice, they come, they'll be put in a special place in the boat so that they'll know where to come, the rescuers will know where to come and get them. I tell you that because when I was minister, I was told of a practice in our schools. I was in a meeting with 12 disability organizations, family advocacy organizations, coming to meet with me. I wanted their feedback on what we were doing and what we could do better. And they told me about this situation where in fire drills in our schools, some of our schools, children in wheelchairs who weren't on the first floor, so if they were up on the second floor, they'd be taken to a common room when the fire bell rang, with assurances that in an emergency, they'd be taken to the special room, they would shut the door and put a sign on the door, and when the fire department came to the school to rescue and put the fire out, that they were told to know which room to go to first. We'll make sure to go in first and get those kids in that room. And they're telling me this, and my jaw drops to the floor. I said, we wouldn't treat our pets like that. You know, and I looked over to the deputy minister and said, what are we going to do? And she looked over to the assistant deputy, and he looked over to this director, and they all asked what they were going to do. And I said, well, I know what we're going to do. We're going to go to the fire marshal's office and say this is unacceptable. You get everyone out of the building. You put a plan in place. And what was hurtful is, can you imagine the message that sent to other kids who have been herded outside for safety? Well, you can be sure that we changed that practice. And there's plans in place where every child is removed during a fire drill. But that's the importance of hearing from family advocates about these types of things that you don't always get a chance to hear from your department, because we're all very busy. And it's not because of the silos and the isolation and the shielding from the minister information that they need to know on the ground level of what's actually happening. It's just because of our schedules. So having family advocates inform us of what's happening just puts a different perspective on things. Anyways, you get the picture with the boat. And so that's the challenge, to try to make our ships, because I thought, well, wouldn't it be nice to just build new schools and have close down 2 old schools and put them together? Well, most times that's not realistic. Why I am passionate about inclusive education, there's many reasons. My father was a truck driver. My mother was a homemaker. When I was 4, I have a twin brother as well, and I have an older brother. All 3 of us were elected in the legislature at different times, but my twin brother and I were elected at the same time. First in North America, set of twins elected in the House, but that's another story. We called ourselves the 2-car garage at the legislature. But anyways, my mother, so when I was 4, our parents separated. My mother went on welfare, social assistance. We went into social housing, and I always remember the importance of our teachers in school, giving us a love, giving us the hugs. I remember my first bike that I got was made and built by my grandfather, who got the bike used parts out of the neighborhood dump and built my first bike. And I remember it was one of those banana bikes with the banana seat, and mine had flowers on it. So, not wanting to be isolated and discriminated against and whatnot, I covered it up with black electrical tape. But I loved that bike, and it was new to me. But feeling welcome, feeling belonged, having a sense of I could do anything. And I had so many teachers that made me feel that way. I wanted to make sure, as minister, that we had every child feeling that way. But also when I went to school, we had some children in our school that had disability, but they weren't included in our classroom. And around middle school, I'd go through the hallway, and 2 girls had disabilities, but I'm ashamed to say I didn't know who they were, and I was scared of them. And I was scared to walk past them in the hallway because I thought they'd attack me. I guess you keep seeing those images of the blue jail. But we didn't know any different, and I keep telling myself that. We didn't know any different. But you know what? It drives me to change, because I was robbed of the opportunity to know the difference. I was robbed of the beauty of knowing difference and abilities of each child. And I wanted to make sure that other children are not robbed of that opportunity, because we know that inclusive education is not only a gift for students with disabilities, but it's a gift for all children. And my daughters, I want to make sure that they have the opportunity, and we actually encourage the opportunities to have children with disabilities in our daughters' classrooms, or kids' First Nation background in their classrooms, so that they have that chance to be exposed to difference. Catalyst for change is the political will. Teachers need help, and families demand better. We're talking about implementing a shift from 2 parallel streams to 1. It must be seen as an equal right afforded to everybody, regardless of any differences. We've heard about that. Once that is understood and accepted by citizens, success will follow. The research clearly shows that school systems that commit both resources and policies to ensuring all students succeed together see positive results. They realize better academic results than students in systems that separate students with behavioral problems or disabilities. And realize that above any and everything else, it has to be about improvements in education for everyone. Roger mentioned school-wide reform. We know that The current two parallel system working in isolation is not working at all. It doesn't provide the overall best results, and I don't know how many people we can count on that can say it's working for anyone. The education system has problems. It does not spend resources effectively. There are many, many needs, too many demands. It's not coordinated. Two parallel systems are not good socially, economically, or educationally. Also, another way of looking at it is a three-sided triangle as opposed to a four-sided triangle. The change process is about working together. That was our approach. I wanted to mention about the reports and the reviews, and the point I wanted to make about that was it was the same thing. When I was minister, I didn't want to just do another inquiry or another review. It was not going to happen while I was minister because we've talked long enough about it, we studied it. What we wanted was action and change. And the first step in that change process is working together, but also having assertive leadership from the top. We have to get buy-in, understand why, understand the problem, understand that change is hard for many people, discuss the vision. What are we talking about? Where have we come from? What is the rest of the world doing in sound, evidence-based, inclusive practices? What does the research say? Where do what you need to do to create partnerships with key stakeholders, teachers associations, academic authorities on inclusive education, parent and family advocacies, and political. Create value for each partner. The other thing is always stay focused on what, why, and how. Oh, yes, right. I was late on showing this last night too, the little spirally around like that. That's important to really take note of. Do you know how long that took me to figure that out? Yeah, I hope no one gets dizzy by that. But don't forget the what, the why, and the how of inclusive education. And I'm not going into a lot of those details because we know, though, that when it works well, it feels like hitting a strike in the bowling lane. When it doesn't work, as I said, it's not inclusion. Inclusion, properly designed, understood, and supported, you have both equality and quality, and you can have both. I have one example I wanted to mention. A family had come to me, quite profound disabilities, nonverbal, in a wheelchair, and the parents told me about this field trip they were going on, and it really hurt them that all the other kids, there were two buses to take the kids out to the field trip. One bus was all the other kids. It was overcrowded, it was stuffy, and Neil's bus was just him on the bus. It was wheelchair accessible. And as Neil was getting loaded onto the special needs bus, the other bus left without him, and he was supposed to get on the bus and eventually come meet the rest of the kids. But his mom was telling me about that, and I learned so much because she's like, that hurts. I mean, why would they leave him? It's almost as if he wasn't there. And then she said, and you know what? Why are all the kids crammed on that first bus? If we just split them up a bit, we could give everyone more space if we use both buses equally. And so that's where we can have equality and quality and common friggin' sense. So those were some of the things, like, not done intentionally, but what we do, Jihad mentioned as well, what we do sends a message. What we do well sends a message. What we do, even if it's not intentional, what we do not so well sends an even harder message. And that sends a message not only to Neil and his mom, but it sends a message to all the other kids, just like the fire drill evacuation. We know about the what of the class. Start in regular classes. All kids starting in regular classes, no exceptions. That's what we do in New Brunswick. All children are welcome. Teachers respond to different learning styles. Teachers present lessons in different ways, so all children can learn differently. And you can provide the resources that are available for individualized learning. And why? Because we know it's better educationally, economically, and socially. inclusive education is the way the rest of the world is moving, and I'm so pleased to be able to tell you that even Toronto, I think Toronto might be our equivalent to Sydney here, I'm not sure, but even Toronto is starting to move more to an inclusive setting. They've done research to show that their segregated classes, when they compared and documented the post-secondary opportunities, they looked at the children that were put in segregated classes and those that achieved at the same level but were able to be freed from the special classes and somehow escape to the regular class. They had the same academic achievement, but they looked a step further from graduation. What were the opportunities in post-secondary and employment? Even though they had the same achievement levels, those kids in the segregated classes were not going to post-secondary, only because of the inherent discrimination that system created. Talk about the barriers that are created that creates the disability. What makes me so happy is that the Toronto region has a new director that is making change happen, and it's moving towards a more inclusive. So we say if Toronto can do it, it's about time Toronto has been doing it. But it's so exciting. Anyways, three steps of moving forward. One is the planning, the implementation, and sustaining. In the planning, inclusion was the direction we were building upon. It was not up for debate. What was up for debate was how we were going to get there. Yeah. We engaged 2 senior advisors to directly report to the minister. One was Dr. Gordon Porter. His credibility as an educator, a professor, an advocate. In fact, he was a regional student support service director prior to 1986 when we had legislation and additional resources. He was making it happen in the classrooms of his district without legislation and without money. And I can't wait to hear more from Lauren about the school in Queensland. What those schools, when that can happen, it gives us a beacon of hope for the others. And I'd often say as minister, well, gee, if you can make this happen in this school A, across the street, don't tell me the water's any different. You should be able to do it there too, but let's talk about how we can make that happen and put resources in place. We had engaged a number of school leaders that were principals and proven in their commitment. They'd visit schools around the province, and they provided a report. I can go into a lot more detail, but I won't. But there was a lot of work that took place in that 18 months to engage educators, to do surveys, to ask teachers about the time that they were spending on tasks, understand why, what, and how was embedded into the review around the province, and in that was a planning process to make change happen. After 18 months, they provided a report with recommendations, and as I said, I didn't want another report that was going to collect dust on a shelf to add to the 4 that were already done before. So on the same day, it was a little bit coordinated, but on the same day, coincidentally, not coincidentally, we also tabled an action plan in response to the first report of the planning. Meeting the diverse needs of students in regular classrooms needed more support, lo and behold. We needed leadership at all levels of the school system. Lack of clarity of policy, what we meant when we talked of inclusion, lack of training on best practices to plan, manage a diverse classroom, all things that we'd said before had come through this planning process. And so the first year of the action plan, released on the same day, what would make the biggest difference in the shortest amount of time? We had a 3-year action plan, over $7.5 million, and I was able to ask the Premier if we made efficiencies in administration. We don't call them cuts. When we're in government, when we're in opposition, we call them cuts. But when we're in government, we call them looking for efficiencies. And we were able to find some efficiencies in administration, and the Premier allowed us, because of his commitment, to direct those resources to student support services. We hired a senior executive director to be responsible for the change. We had an implementation committee as well, which was very important, that was made up of family advocacy organizations, very similar to family advocacy in New South Wales, at the table. We also had the union at the table as part of the implementation planning. and part of the planning for the implementation and monitoring. So we had people that would support, and they would report directly to the minister in this process change. We also had Policy 322. We also had legislation changes. We eliminated indications of special education. We called all of our support, instead of special education support or student services, we called all of our support education support services, and that education support service was to support the classroom teacher, to make the magic happen, or to allow the magic to happen that the teacher is trained to do, but they need support. Our advocacy and overall good, I think a good piece of advice, that change needs to be about supporting the classroom teacher, and that we're here to help. Advocacy is about helping each other. We're here to help politicians move in the right direction, and the right direction is always the direction we want them to go, right? But we are also here to help classroom teachers. So we mandated in legislation and policy that, we mandated in legislation and policy that there'd be school support teams. Every school would have a school support team made up of teachers from that school. Roger has talked about this and given workshops, and others. Lauren can talk about it as well. But some of the highlights of our policy, all students are placed in regular classrooms with accommodation. That's in policy, in written policy. Also, sorry about that, the variation from the learning environment is justified. So sometimes our anti-inclusionists would say that, yes, but it doesn't work and you're forcing all kids in the classroom and there's behavior problems, it's not gonna work. The point here is, under a human rights framework, is that if you do wanna remove from the classroom, it has to be justified, documented, based on assessment or based on professional input, and it's not just arbitrary to allow a problem to go somewhere else in the school, like maybe the basement or another school, but it has to be documented. Also, no special schools or groupings based on difference. I have copies of this later, also after, if you'd like. It's a little bit hard to read the letters. But anyways, no schools, no special schools or grouping of students based on difference. And another one is ensuring that every school and regional district has a support and transition teams. Quickly, I talked about sustaining already. Advocacy, broadening the tent, align with others. Diversity, this inclusion is about diversity, not just disability. But don't forget disability. Of course you won't. But when we're talking to other people, First Nations or Aboriginal, poverty, sexual identity, gender, race, English as a second language, or having second language training in your school. That's about inclusion and about providing support. Having common ground with those against. Why are people against? As I mentioned earlier, they say inclusion doesn't work, but get down to why they think it doesn't work. Well, because we put our son in this regular class and he wasn't getting the attention. His desk was turned in the back of the corner, so inclusion doesn't work. Well, that's not inclusion. When inclusion works, it works well, but when it doesn't work, it's not inclusion. As again, I mentioned support classroom teachers. It's about philosophy and human rights, but equally important, dynamic, inclusive education is about proven pedagogical practices, embracing diversity and universal design, reaching the learning needs of each child through a planning process with support. It's where the world is going. Again, inclusion is a journey. It must be sustained. It's fragile. Every move forward, you must hold your ground and keep pushing forward. I just wanted to mention quickly what else is happening. I'm a member of the Catalyst for Inclusive Education with Inclusion International, a worldwide organization, 200 member federations in 115 countries. You may have heard of them. Inclusion International has an expert panel, which I happen to be a member of, that shares knowledge, mobilize technical expertise of partners to advance inclusive education policy and practice around the globe, and builds leadership and capacity of members at the local level, and provides training materials, organizing study tours, They review policy and legislation and support some litigation. So keep them in mind, and I'll continue to talk more of this Inclusion International. In closing, I want to sincerely wish you the best of luck in your efforts to bring about inclusion for all children. If at any point of this journey you feel I could be of assistance, please don't hesitate to reach out. We can also be available by Skype. As long as we just get the time right, we can do that. I want to thank Family Advocacy for their leadership. Cecile and Leslie as well, but there's a Linda too. But all of your committee members for providing this leadership strategically. This week we have a jam-packed week of talking to politicians and putting inclusive education on the radar. I'm passionate about this, and I know you are too, and I feel that you're on the cusp of greatness. The cusp of greatness is upon you. And students like Caleb deserves it, and so does all of those who are in a situation like this, many of you, of your children or relatives. Regardless of where they are in the world, they are striving to learn and to find their place. You can do it, and we can do it. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much. I told you, Justin who? Yeah, pretty much. We're pretty much going to do that. I think, to look at that, the people in the room are the right people to be in the room. To do this, we're going to need political leadership, we're going to need education leadership, and we're going to need family leadership. And I think we're the right people for the job. Couple of housekeeping items. Don't forget the resource table when you're out for lunch. The photo booth. We do want to see everyone having had their photo taken. And the advocacy campaign stand. Make sure you swing by there. But for now, take some time, have some lunch, and we'll see you back in here when the bells and gongs ring. Thank you.